Welcome to Global Perspectives. What would you say about a different take on U.S.-Russian relations? For answers, we turn to Dr. Sergei Khrushchev, the son of Nikita Khrushchev.
Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Khrushchev.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Why don't we start by asking you about your impressions regarding the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution?
Each revolution is the destructive period in the history of any country, because you have two different developments. First, let's start with that like in the natural selection, the environment changing. So, and you have to adjust your country, your economy, your political system to this changing environment. And this means you have to reform the country. What in our country was my father was the reformer. Or if you are not reforming the country, you proclaim stability or stagnation. It's happening that you are bringing country to the revolution that will equal to the mass extinction. Because during the reform, the leader who think that he understands what have to be done, he asks people to follow them. If you are proclaiming stability, that means not changing, then in some period of time, most of the people became unhappy, and they want to ruin everything, changing overnight. And this was happened in Russia in 1917, really in 1905, where this revolution began. Because the great reformer of the 19th century, Emperor Alexander II, he freed the peasants, the serfs. So they was now able to leave their villages, their places. But they give them freedom, but without land. So they have to survive in some way. Ordinary peasants, they worked for the same landlords. Most active person, they moved to the cities and they started businesses. They meant banking, manufacturing, all others. But they still had no right. So it was a strong pressure, we need these changes. But each reformer have big problem himself, because he have liberals on one side who told not enough, you have to do everything, you talk conservative. And you have the conservative, he told that you ruin our country, and he have to maneuver between them. So my father, he became the great reformer on the 20th century. Because after Stalin, he came and he told that we may have to make country more democratic. And also, he understood that central economy is not working, not effective. It's not competitive with the Western economy. So he told that this economy have to be decentralized. And he made this preparation from 1962 till 1964. And he was ready to introduce new constitution with 2 terms of the presidency, with the responsible government and many other things. And also to give all this control of the economy to the director of the enterprises, then inevitably he'll bring the country later for the privatization, because if you can control your enterprise, you have to need your own money, not the state money. The same, the liberals, mostly young, told, no, not enough, you have to do everything. And their colleague from the Central Committee and the elite from the Communist Party told, no, he is ruining our country, what he is introducing. So in October 1964, he was removed from the power and replaced by Brezhnev, who proclaimed the stability. And it was 18 years of the cold stability, nothing changes. everybody aging, and at last, in the late 70s, early 80s, people were tired from Brezhnev rule. They were tired from the old system, and they want to change us overnight. That means revolution. Let's destroy everything, and then. They don't know what will be then. And it was, Brezhnev died, and then Gorbachev came to power in 1985, and he faced this challenge when the majority of the people, they wanted these changes of everything, and he couldn't manage it. So at last we face the revolution of 1991. It was the Yeltsin-Gaidar revolution. Who told? We don't like now Karl Marx theory and the idea of the socialist society. We want to follow the book of the Milton Friedman with the free market and the shock therapy. And it was these changes that really didn't reform the society. They destroyed all system. And it was very destructive. The same like Revolution 1917. They could not build anything because they started this privatization, but not giving this enterprise and control them to the people who can manage them. But it was that people whom they chose, that people who was able only to loot all these enterprises. And this was beginning of this failure of the country, because it was 3,000% inflation. The GDP dropped down up to the more than 30%. And everybody became very poor. It was empty shells from the very beginning, and the poverty of the majority of the people at the end of this period. And after that, like after any revolution, you have to bring the new ruler to the country. That means that in the 2000, the elite understood that Yeltsin physically not able to rule the country. And they pressed him to resign, and he was replaced by Putin. In such environment, first of all, when all majority of the people want this changing overnight, ruin everything, it's very difficult then to control the society, to control the country, because in the time of the reforms, when you proclaiming fall of me, like it was Khrushchev did in 1964, he still have the trust of the majority of the people who would follow him. If the people want this revolution, like it was in 1905 or 1985, most of them saying, no, we don't want fall of you. We want changes overnight. Because the Gorbachev advisors told him, let's start reforming the country to the more effective decentralized economy, and it will take several years. But the people don't know. We want to do it now, instantly.
And that never works.
It never works because Yeltsin, he was ignorant person, but very decisive. And he took his economist, so-called young reformer Gaidar, who told, we will follow the book of Milton Friedman, and we will just introduce the shock therapy, and this is destroyed the country. So it didn't work because each revolution is destructive. And it was the same destruction like destruction was 1917, that was then followed by the new economic policy of Yeltsin, of Lenin in 1921. And it was the same destructive at the Yeltsin time, which followed later by the new policy of Putin, who came to power in 2000.
So tell us your interpretation of Vladimir Putin. What is he as far as a person, as far as a Russian national, as far as a president, et cetera, et cetera? What is your evaluation of him?
At the end of the Yeltsin rule, 1999, the Russian budget was smaller than the budget of Belgium. The so-called new owners, the looters, they created this looting economy. They didn't pay taxes. They didn't pay salaries. They didn't pay pension. They only suck all these resources from the country. So the first, what they needed that time to restore order in the country. It was maybe similar what happened in this country in the end of the 19th century before the Theodore Roosevelt took over the country. So it was the looting oligarchy who took all this control and made this decision, leading by their greediness. And when Putin came, he was not the economist. He was former KGB officer. But he understood that first what he need to put this oligarchy under the control. And he was really elected, but one of the Yeltsin oligarch, Boris Berezovsky, who controlled media and the TV. So, but next day after he was elected, he started to impose this pressure on the oligarchy. And when Berezovsky came to him and told, no, you have to sign these orders in our interest, he told, no, now I'm the president. And Berezovsky answered him, I elected you. And he told, yes, you elected me, thank you. But now I will do what I have understand this favor of the country. And he restored the order. That was very positive. He was new, young person who imposed strong pressure on these oligarchs. And he took some of them and they immigrated under this pressure. Some of them he arrested and sent to jail. He couldn't arrest everybody. And all others, they really started to work under the rules that was set up in the country. So he restored paying taxes, he restored paying salaries, paying the pensions, and through this he received the strong support from the people. But during the previous time, they transformed the Russian economy from the normal economy to the third world economy based on the export natural resources, natural gas, oil, some metals, and others. And still country worked the same way. So Putin also proclaimed that now it will be the democracy. So when he served the two periods of 4 years, like it was in the new Russian constitution, he refused to run to the third time. He told it's against the constitution and I will retire. And it will be a very good decision because in 8 or 10 years, each ruler running out the ideas. He will implement everything what he has. Why we have this replacement in the law? And would the Putin really retired in 2008, he will be the great leader of the Russia. But he decided still stay in the real power. He became the prime minister, and later in 4 years he was re-elected under the new law into the third term, because he told it is against the law if you have the third term without just interaction. Now he told we have this transition president, President Medvedev. Now I will replace him.
So what does that mean for?
And Putin had the right idea. He told we have to reform the economy to support returning to the production of the real goods, the machinery, the aircrafts, ships, cars, everything. But he didn't know how to do it, so it's never worked. So he still ran the economy based on the exporting natural resources. It's still now in Russia. He was like ruler of the Russian authoritarian state under the new Yeltsin constitution that gave very strong power to the president. So he controlled the country. So now he proclaimed the stability, and it is the same that he don't know how to reform the country, and country slowly moving to the, my understanding, to the new revolution.
Well, before we get to that, let me then ask you a question. So he promised that he would support the new democracy in Russia, but then the way things have evolved and he's back in power as president, that's a question mark. He had promised to improve the economy, but as you said, didn't really understand how to do it and has relied on the old system. So if the economy's not working, the political system's not working, is that what's driving the revolution?
He improved the existing economy, putting the orders that press these new oligarchs transform themselves from oligarchy who run the country just to rich people who, like everywhere, paying taxes. It was very corrupt society, but it is a different side of the economy. But he didn't have this magic clue that allow to transform economy in the different structure. He didn't really know how to do it, and so still he's running this economy based on the selling natural resources. In the political side, Yeltsin, after 1993, imposed the system where the Russian president have much stronger power than any other presidential republic in the world, and the Putin inherited this structure. And after being in the power for 8 years, he told, yes, now I will retire, but I will be the president. And so he still keep his power over the country like before, like it was in the previous authoritarian rule, like it's happened with the most post-Soviet states, because to transform to the real democracy, you need to change the mentality of the people. That means that you will give the preference to the law, to the rules. In the authoritarian state, you give the preference to the goodwill of the ruler. That happened before in the Russian Imperial Russia, in the Soviet Union, and it is still the same in the new Russia, in the Yeltsin time and in the Putin time.
So do you see a new revolution coming soon, or in the next 5 years? What kind of time frame?
I don't know when the revolution will come. I know only one thing, that Putin staying in power from 2000, and we live now in 2017. Under the new constitution and the amendment to the constitution that was imposed by his predecessor Medvedev, now it is not for year term, but tenure, but for the 6 years. So he have to be re-elected in next year, 2018, for next 6 years. So it will mean that legally he will stay in power from 2000 to 2024. And from my understanding, the stability, not reforming the country for 24 years, bringing the people to this pre-revolutionary society where majority won't change it overnight. And now, because they did not able to transform this economy, still people supporting Putin, still they living much better than it was under Yeltsin, but it's slowly going down. So my feeling, I can't say understanding because we don't know what will be, that it can bring the people to the environment in which they would want these changes overnight. The majority of the Russian people also don't remember all these destructive consequences of the Yeltsin time. And the young people don't know. So it is growing, the protest movement in Russia. We see it is different dissidents like Navalny. I don't believe that Navalny is really fighting against the corruption, but he is just vocally proclaimed that full of my ideas as we follow Yeltsin when he wanted to replace Gorbachev. So it is possible that it will bring country to the revolution if somebody will not find out how to reform this economy and bring this on the tracks. Because
let me ask you a quick question as we're coming to the end of the show. If there is a revolution, will that possibly be good for U.S.-Russian relations or bad for U.S.-Russia, or is it impossible to say compared to what we have now?
U.S.-Russian relations not so much depend on a revolution, because it will be bad for the country. Because if you are coming to the power without this plan of the reforming political structure, domestic structure, just changing overnight, this will be destructive, as we know from the experience of all revolutions, the French Revolution, the British Revolution, the Russian Revolution, because the revolution is like Big Bang and bringing us to great destruction. How it will affect Russian United States relations, very difficult to say, because this is it is not so much depend of these domestic problems. It depend of the person who will come to the power. Maybe it will become better. Maybe it will be worse. In 1991, it became much better than it was before.
For a short period of time.
For a short period of time, because both sides, and mostly Americans, made many mistakes trying to behave with Russia like a defeated country. You know that President Reagan proclaimed, we won the Cold War. And Russians want to be recognized as the country that have their national interests. And what was happened is, when the President Putin in 2007 proclaimed, you have to recognize our national interests and negotiate with us. And we wanted to punish him. And we imposed all the sanctions. and he responded for this sanction. It's made us to the very low level, because it was the sanction, it was expansion of NATO. Both of these transform the mood of the Russian people from the feeling that they are friends of the Americans, and now they look Americans as the enemies.
So I
and
think
very hostile for them.
I understand. We'll pause now. I'm sure we'll have lots of material for a future show, but I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Khrushchev.
Thank you.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.